Welcome to another episode of the Confidence in Conflict podcast, your destination for learning how to prevent and better manage conflict in both your professional and personal lives. I read an article last week titled The Empathy Crisis, as written by a school social worker. She says she's seen more what she calls interpersonal disconnection in schools and is frightened by it. Well, at Vistelar, we've heard the same thing from our education clients. In fact, if you go to all our clients, we hear a pretty consistent message of increased aggression going on, less respect, more mental health issues. Just seems like things are escalating here in the last, 5 to 10 years. And that's what the author of this article is talking about, her experience over the last, I think, about a decade. So this author, like us, that she related this back to a decrease in empathy. Now, that's a word that's being used more and more. You see it in articles and the media, even in day-to-day conversations. I don't remember talking about it all about empathy in the past. And it seems like in the last, several years that empathy is like becoming a bigger and bigger deal. So, and there's lots of definitions of empathy. At Vistelar, we define it as this: the practice of seeing the world through another person's eyes instead of from your eyes or your perspective. It's viewing, seeing the perspective of others. So what do you think's going on here, right? First of all, is this really happening? Do you think we really have an empathy crisis going on in society? Or is the author of this article and maybe the folks at Vistelar here, we're just tainted because that's the nature of our jobs, right? We're seeing conflict and issues and, social workers obviously dealing with a whole variety of situations. But if it is a crisis, and that's certainly our view, what's going on? What's causing this? So if you have any thoughts on either of these questions, is this happening, number one? And two, is there a crisis? We'd love to hear from you. So check out our blog and comment on the podcast or on our blog or wherever. Send us an email. Now, by the way, the author of this article, she's come to the conclusion that it's technology that's causing this. Right? Social media, smartphones, always on, violent video games. She said that that just must be playing some kind of role in this problem with crisis and a crisis of empathy, as she describes it. Now, we've heard this from other educators also, but I don't think anyone really fully understands what's going on here quite yet. If you look at our research, we expect it's due to a large number of factors, with technology likely just being one of them. So we'll be exploring this in more depth in future episodes of this podcast, so stay tuned. Now, if all goes as planned, we'll be publishing this podcast the day before Thanksgiving. So if you're a timely listener, happy Thanksgiving. I'm sure you've experienced there's nothing like an extended family dinner to provide many opportunities to practice your empathy skills. So good luck with that. Next week, a big week for Vistelar. Gary and I will be spending 9 days in London, England, for the kickoff of an expansion of Vistelar into the UK and the Middle East. Now, if we can find the time during our trip, we'll be recording an episode, so watch for that. Also, let's get on to this week's podcast and interview. My guest is Jeff Campbell. He's a 24-year veteran of Lansing, Michigan Sheriff's Office, who became an authorized Vistelar trainer about 5 years ago. And then about 3 years ago, he got involved in what's called crisis intervention training. Now, I really enjoyed my interview with Jeff. I've heard about crisis intervention training for years, but always had a bunch of questions that Jeff does a great job of answering. Note that for some reason, we don't fully understand the sound quality of Jeff's side of the interview. It isn't as good as we like. I hope this isn't a distraction from the great information that Jeff shares. Okay. So welcome to another episode of the Confidence in Conflict podcast, right? Your destination to learn how to better manage conflict in your personal life and your professional life. And I'm here with Jeff Campbell. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Ellen. How are you?
I'm good. We've been trying to get this scheduled for a while, so I'm glad to have you on the call.
Yeah, it's good to speak with you again.
Maybe for the audience, just give a little summary of your background and how you know us here at Vistelar and whatever.
I currently work for a sheriff's office in the Lansing, Michigan area. I've been with this agency for just a little over 24 years. And my background is 25 years in law enforcement with a lot of road patrol and investigative experience. And back in 2014, I became a instructor for Vistelar through Dave Young and Gary Klubowitz.
Oh wow! So I didn't know it was that far back. So that's great. Okay, so about 5 years.
Yep, been pretty close to 5 years now, and we've been running this program, teaching this program at my agency ever since.
So, and that's how many folks in the department there?
We have about 70 sworn road patrol on the law enforcement side, and about another 35 corrections personnel.
And all those people have gone through the Vistelar training program in some form.
Correct. Yep. Everybody that gets hired here now goes through that as part of their administrative training in their first couple of weeks of working here. So they have a baseline for it, and then they continue with their field training.
Very cool. So I know, and then you also have, and you've been actively involved in the CIT, or crisis intervention training, in your area.
Yes. Yep. For about the last 3 years.
How many years? Say it again.
About 3 years.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Okay. So tell me more about that. I know, we're, we have a CIT here in the Milwaukee area. I just actually, one of our trainers, Joel Ashley, presented at a CIT program that was out in Waukesha, which is a suburb here of Milwaukee. And, but I know it happens, they run these programs differently all over the country. So tell me more about how this works in Lansing.
We put ours together as a cooperative effort. And what we call it is the Tri-County Crisis Intervention Team. And it's a collection of agencies, police agencies from the Ingham, Eaton, Clinton area of Michigan, mid-Michigan area, and as well as hospitals in our area and mental health facilities and counselors, therapists, doctors from the various disciplines. We all come together and came together about 3 years ago or so and designed the curriculum based on the national CIT model.
And do you have a NAMI office there?
We do. Yep, NAMI Lansing with representatives on our CIT board. We are a 501c3 board now, just recently established as a board, so we can manage the funds that we need to keep the training going and so forth.
And is the NAMI there? I know here there's actually paid folks. Is it a volunteer group or is it?
Ours is a volunteer group. Yep.
All the NAMI people are volunteer too.
In my particular area, yes.
Yep. So and just for the folks that don't know, so NAMI, I know that's National Association of Mental.
I believe National Alliance of for Mental Illness.
I think so. Yep.
Putting me on the spot there. Yeah.
And did they start in Memphis, or is that a somehow?
No. Well, CIT originally started in Memphis, Tennessee. Major Sam Cochran, I believe, is one of the founding members of the CIT movement. But it had started in Tennessee years ago after a fairly controversial shooting of a mentally ill man.
And then how did NAMI get? Do you know how they got involved in?
I think they see, at least from speaking to our local volunteers, they see it as a necessary connection between people who are suffering from mental illness and law enforcement because there's so much interaction between the two. So they see it as a really important tactic or a piece of training for law enforcement and how they can better deal with mentally ill and seeing it from the perspective of people that have gone through that.
So do you know, how many, at some point, it sounds like NAMI just adopted the Memphis CIT model and said, we're going to have.
Yeah, they definitely support it pretty strongly.
Yep. So I know I think it varies by the area, but you said that in your area, it's a 40-hour program. So just describe it for the group here. What do you do during those? It's for law enforcement, right? CIT is it's a law enforcement program.
Yep, law enforcement and corrections in our area. And,
yep. And it's a 40-hour program. So
40-hour program. Yep.
So what do you do during the week?
Well, we do starts out with an introduction to verbal non-escalation, de-escalation tactics. We go through a very, very short version of the Vistelar program or something similar to it. And that's basically just an introduction. And then we also spend part of the week introducing them to the various different mental health diagnosis possibilities, the medications that people use. We talk a lot about substance use disorders, those kinds of things. And we bring in doctors and therapists, experts in particular aspects of mental health to talk about each of those things. And it ranges from, like I said, substance use disorders to elderly people with cognitive disorders or dementia. So, and everything in between. So we give them a basic familiarity with all of those things. And we take the verbal tactics and the knowledge of those things and we weave that into scenarios. And so we actually put them through a number of scenarios along the way throughout the week.
Oh, cool.
So they get a chance to practice the verbal tactics in a situation that they've been taught about. So they could be dealing with a homeless person with some sort of mental illness for one scenario, and then they might go to a youth situation with a completely different diagnosis.
And are the speakers, well, for how often do you do the class?
Twice a year. We've been doing it twice a year. And I think we've done a total of 5 classes now. We're going to be doing our 6th one here in December.
And just how many people would be in a class?
We take a maximum of 40 per class. So,
okay.
And we've filled up every class so far. So,
wow. And so the speakers that you have, because I know that here in Waukesha, I think there was over the course of the week, I looked at the agenda. I was only there for a day, but it seemed like there was maybe 8 or so speakers. Is that how many folks do you have involved?
Probably more than that. The thing that I think is unique about our program, and maybe it's not as unique anymore, but from what I hear, we are one of the only places doing it this way. We use all volunteers from our local area, our local expertise. Our local doctors come in and they speak, and they obviously aren't charging us anything to do this. But we have a pretty wide base of people that are committed to doing this and making this training as inexpensive as possible. We're charging $100 per officer for this training, and that's basically just enough to cover our materials. And we bring in lunch for the class so that we can basically work through lunch.
Yep.
So
that's so the numbers then. So how many speakers would you have?
Oh, probably 15. Depending on the block of training. Sometimes we have a panel of speakers that will come in and tag team a particular type of block of training. So we're doing this with no outside funding whatsoever, no grant funding, no consultants. From what I hear, that's pretty.
And you're just using a space there at somebody's police?
Yep. We have a police, the Lansing Police Department hosts it, and they've got a really good area for spreading out to do scenarios and really good training facilities.
So there's so you've had 5 classes. So is it basically the same 15 people each time, or is it a whole bunch of different people each time?
For the most part, the speakers and the instructors are the same. We sometimes will have to, switch it out. One doctor might not be available this time, so we look for the backup. It depends on the situation. Yeah.
So there's psychologists coming, psychiatrists, people that know about, like you said, drug abuse, cognitive disabilities, dementia, and it's local experts in all those areas, and they come in and they do like what, an hour kind of segment, a couple hour segment?
Yeah, it depends on the segment. Most of them are minimum a half hour. Most of them are an hour or so. And we also cover the legalities, the mental health law in Michigan. And go over that with officers in the courts.
Is it all in the classroom, or do you go out and do any visitation?
We do not do any visitation anywhere. It's all in the classroom or in the building where we set up the scenarios. So
Because I know this Waukesha group, I got the impression it was maybe a day of the 5 days. They went out and visited a local, I think, nursing home, maybe a mental health institution, mental health clinic, and just to see kind of firsthand what some of this is like. Maybe a homeless shelter. I'm not sure exactly all the places they go, but you're pretty much in the classroom. So, how would you describe what's the primary top 2 or 3 goals here for the training? What are you trying to accomplish by the end of the week?
Number one, to introduce verbal tactics that a lot of the officers that are in this class are pretty familiar with anyway, or pretty much practice this, in their course of their normal duties, even though they may not call it the same thing that you and I would, but they're kind of already doing it. And so we give it a name, and we go through some tools and tactics that they can use. And for the most part, they're already pretty good at it. So now we just take it and we specifically focus on people in crisis, whether it's due to mental illness or substance use. And we give them some tools that maybe they weren't previously aware of for handling those situations. And we give them some familiarity on the various mental health diagnoses out there and what they might be able to do to recognize that or respond to it, even if they don't necessarily recognize exactly what it is.
Yep. So, that was my impression. And what I saw a couple of weeks ago is that, and it's a mix. Tell me what percentage. So obviously part of this is just an awareness of and knowledge about what's mental illness like, what are the different, attributes, how would you identify it, whatever, what substance abuse, all the stuff you described. What percentage of the week is that of what I'd call it awareness and understanding?
Probably at least half of it.
Half, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other half is on some tactics and then practice and scenarios.
Correct. Yep. We devote a full day and a half over the course of the week to scenarios that they actually get to use the knowledge and the training that they've been given over the course of the week. So that's a full day and a half of the class. And prior to that, we'll do maybe a couple of mini scenarios where they just get to practice or role play, that kind of thing. So
and then what kind of feedback do you get, right? You're obviously heavily involved in it, and you've been doing this 5 of them. So if you were to summarize what you hear from the officers after they're done, what do they say?
It's really been positive feedback, not just after the class. I mean, you'll get a lot of people. We always stay and chat with people at the end of the class, and it's nice to hear what they think is most important. And it's different for everybody what they get from the class and what's most stands out the most to them. But what I really like is, weeks and months down the road, you start hearing stories about how they used it or something that they learned in the class helped them handle a particular scenario. And I hear that probably most often from the people in my own agency, but I'll run across people that have gone through the class at other agencies, and it's fun to talk to them about it because you see how beneficial it can be.
Yep, big time. So let's talk just through an example so the listener here can figure out what we're talking about. So you're a law enforcement officer, right? You're dealing with, obviously it's in the news like almost every night, right? Some kind of a mental illness issue.
Yeah.
Obviously, those can go south. So tell a story or whatever about what this is like and what tactics maybe people learned in either, CIT, but then also the Vistelar training, whatever that would apply and how they make a difference.
Well, I have one that I think is a really good story, and it was shortly after he went through the crisis intervention training. I have a deputy that is actually a veteran of the Marine Corps and served some time in combat in Iraq. He'd been with us for a while and went through the crisis intervention training, and not too long after that, we were called to assist one of our other local agencies with a person that was having some sort of crisis duty mental health and alcohol use, kind of a combination. So when he got there, he had already been smashing bottles and walking through it with bare feet. He almost completely undressed and was out running around in a fairly large backyard of a residential area, and was gathering a crowd in the neighborhood, obviously, and he was shooting down or trying to shoot down the helicopters that were flying overhead that he thought he was seeing. So the deputy that obviously a number of cops showed up, but this deputy, he was kind of given the lead on it because he has the military background and he's a CIT officer. So he kind of took over, and it was probably roughly 30 minutes or so of just working through, number one, getting to get his attention and keep him focused on something other than the helicopters and the crowd that were distracting him, just to get him to talk to him enough to be able to start to calm him down a little bit. Yep. It's a really cool thing to watch. There's some really good video of it, and it takes an enormous amount of patience, and you can see that it took a lot of patience for that particular deputy, but also the other officers involved, because he's mobile, he's moving around, he's got a pretty wide area to move around in, and we've got a number of officers there that have to basically just try to keep him somewhat contained without provoking anything or escalating the situation by their body language or their mannerisms or their words. And they all did just a great job of kind of stepping back and letting him have the lead role and getting him to focus on one particular person and talk through that. And as he does it, you can see he starts to calm down a little bit, and he finally sits down and they start talking, and he eventually is able to get him into handcuffs without any force whatsoever. Got him to the hospital shortly after that. So,
but Jeff, I'm going to interrupt and just I think, just so people don't miss it, this was 30 minutes, right? Good. When you talk about patience, you were listening and stepping back and slowing down for 30 minutes before you got to that point. Is that right?
Yeah, and it went up and it went down. He'd start to get some ground, and it was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. He'd start to gain some ground and get him calmed down, and then the guy would spot somebody in the neighborhood, and that would make him mad. And so he had to redirect him, get him to focus his attention back on the deputy, back, talk to me. And it helped that he had the military background, because they could talk about some similarities, in their experiences. And that was definitely a huge factor in this particular one, I think, because he could talk the talk. Yep. He had some real world experience that he could talk about, that he could relate to this guy with. So that definitely made a huge impact, I think.
But it's like a huge point, right? Is that in most law enforcement, that's not the normal natural behavior to just kind of hang out for 30 minutes, right? You're in there trying to, take action and get something done and get the handcuffs on, and right. Yeah, so this requires a different mode of operation. I mean, you got to have some patience and.
Well, it's becoming a lot more the norm in law enforcement than maybe it was 25 years ago when I started. It's moved towards a lot more of a time, distance, and cover approach, where you're taking your time, you maintain the appropriate distance, and you make good use of your cover, or you at least know where it's at. And that's what we're teaching our people. And so you're seeing it a lot more, I think, in law enforcement in general, but at least around here, you're seeing a lot more of that as your overall foundation.
Yeah, and I probably misstated. Maybe it's more to say it's not human nature, maybe is the better way to state, right? You got a problem and you want to go fix it rather than.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And, it still amazes me how people in general who aren't in law enforcement want us to move a lot faster in a situation like this than we're going to do.
Right. Exactly.
And they don't understand why we're not just running in and grabbing the guy, throwing him on the ground and putting him in handcuffs and hauling away.
Exactly. That's more my point. Yeah. Yep.
And that still surprises me sometimes, where we get crucified over the way we handle something when we go too fast, but then when you've got a crowd out there, they don't ever think you're going fast enough. So.
Yeah, and you know Joel Ashley, one of our trainers, but I think, I don't know if I got this exactly right, but he says, there's a tendency to talk too loud, get too close, talk too much.
Yep, exactly.
And it's, you just got to slow down and so describe, during that 30 minutes, right? You said at the beginning here, during the CIT training and the Vistelar training, obviously also you're learning, some de-escalation and crisis intervention tactics.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond just being patient and slowing down and being willing to take your time and not rush things, give me just a couple of examples of what would happen during that 30 minutes.
One of the things that struck me about it, and maybe this isn't textbook, but what I thought the deputy did really well was being able to read what he needed, exactly how he needed to project his voice at any given moment. So he would start out with sort of like a drill sergeant voice because he needed to get that guy's attention. And he'd get that guy's attention, and the guy would respond to it because he's a military guy and he knew exactly how to say it in that right way. And then as soon as he got the attention, the deputy ramps it right down and starts talking to him in a little bit more of a soothing voice. And, hey, this is how we need to talk, and this is how we're going to talk to each other. And if he'd lose him again, he'd go right back to drill sergeant mode just for a second till he got his...
Just to get his attention. I love it. Yep.
And it worked really, really well.
Yep.
And that's something I don't know if you can teach somebody that necessarily. This particular deputy is just really, really good at that. And has a feel for that situation to be able to read that situation.
Yeah. And Jeff, as you know, we teach it, and I'm sure it's part of the CIT, is that when you're interacting with somebody, you're obviously your words matter, but that tone of voice matters way more.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And your positioning relative to the person. I'm sure, this guy wasn't in the guy's face. He was back, some distance.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
This was probably 40, 50 feet at least, at various times. And they didn't really get close to each other until right near the end, where the guy finally agrees to comply and allow himself to be handcuffed.
Yep. So, just again, to reemphasize that, you're 40 feet away in this interaction. You're not 5 feet or 3 feet or where you might normally think you'd be. You're hanging back, and tone of voice, crazy important. Obviously, words being important, but tone of voice being more important.
Yep.
We call that, we call that proxemics of just, how your whole body positioning relative to that other person and your tone of voice, all that stuff's really, really important. So you got that. So the guy's great tone of voice. He's dealing with the guy's Marine background, and
Mm-hmm.
but then bringing the person down by the tone of voice, right? If you're loud, they're going to rise up to where you are. If you're quiet, they're going to, hopefully come down to where you are.
Yep.
Right.
And, as you can imagine, there's quite a few verbal assaults going on from this guy. And what I really also like, not just the deputy that's doing the main interaction with him, but there's, other cops out there, and he's insulting them one by one, saying various things to them, trying to get them to engage with him. And they're not. They're basically redirecting him right back to the original deputy, the main deputy who's got the lead on this. And that helped keep it from escalating. And it could have been very easy for any of them to think, well, he's not getting anywhere, I'm going to take over. But they didn't do that. So
two things there. Just expand a bit on, obviously it's a term you and I know, is redirection. So just for the listeners, tell us what that means.
Well, it's like a springboard, basically, where you're deflecting the verbal assault and you're redirecting them back to the task at hand, I like to call it, or the issue at hand. So,
exactly.
So if you're, somebody calls you fat and bald, and that is one of the things that this guy said to one of our officers. It was you hear, Nick, yeah, I hear you and that, but you're not talking to him. You got to talk to me, okay? He's not He's just there to make sure I stay safe. Let's talk to me, okay? And so he would just keep him focused on one particular person.
Yep.
So,
yep.
And you could see when he finally realized that nobody else was really going to talk to him. If he wanted to keep talking, engaging with anybody, it was going to be that one particular person. So.
Yep. And so let me jump on that just for a minute, and then we'll come back to redirection, because one voice is like crazy important in these situations.
Yeah.
That the guy's not hearing. Obviously there's things going on there, and if you got Joe over here saying one thing, and Bill's saying something else, and Mary's saying something else, and his brain's not working perfectly. It's really, really tough, right? For that communication to occur. You get one person, right, and everybody else is being quiet. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. You can easily overwhelm somebody in crisis with yelling or loud voices or too many people moving around too quickly. Too much light, too loud of sounds in the background. It's so many things that can keep you from communicating with a person in crisis that you've got to try to manage some of those.
Yeah, and Joel's 4 strategies. So we don't have time to go over them all here, but that's obviously reduce stimulation and then adapt your communication to the situation, or a couple of them, and we just talked through that. But back to the redirection, the term we use is acknowledge and then back to the issue, right? So you're acknowledging the fact that you're listening to the guy. It's not that you're ignoring him or being disrespectful. You're acknowledging the fact that, I hear you. I appreciate that. You called me bald. I hear you.
Yeah.
You might joke about it. Oh, I would have worked with this guy. But then let's get back to the issue. You're really talking to whoever this deputy is, and he's the.
Yeah. It was more of a, he's there just to make sure I'm safe. Yeah, exactly. He may be fat and bald, but that's okay. He's here just to make me, make sure that I'm safe. But I want to talk to you about what's going on with you. What's happening that makes you think that we aren't here to help you, that we're going to take you to jail? Because the guy was concerned that he was just going to jail for some reason. He had not actually committed a crime of any kind at that point. So hadn't assaulted anyone, hadn't talked about assaulting anybody. He was a threat to himself. Obviously, he was disturbing the neighborhood, but.
And how big a crowd was it?
Not bad. I mean, it's a pretty wide open, somewhat rural subdivision type area. So, you had 5 or 6 houses within visible distance of where this guy was at. So otherwise, it was a fairly wide open area. The houses aren't real close together.
Yep. So. Well, and it's yes. So obviously that wasn't the problem, but that's one of the things we emphasize a lot, is that if let's say you were in a classroom, in this situation, is one of the first things you'd probably do is say, either everybody in class go out in the hallway. So now we call it separate and support, but you've separated that person from all that hubbub of the crowd and people having to deal with, whatever their feelings are about people watching and whatever. You're getting rid of that. Or, if the opportunity exists, you go out in the hallway with that person and everybody else stays in the classroom.
Yeah. And in this particular situation, we were not going to be able to do that. These were people's, on their own property at their own house.
Right.
And it's a pretty wide area to deal with. And so obviously we couldn't move them away from the situation easily. And then the whole focus of the conversation with him was to try to get him removed from that situation. So we had to work extra hard on the separate and support aspect of this one.
Yep. So I'm assuming that maybe different words are used or whatever, but the Vistelar training is kind of incorporated into what you do there in Lansing in terms of the.
Yeah. Yep. Essentially, it's about a 2.5, 3 hour block to start the class. It's the introduction to the overall class. And then we kind of interweave the rest of the way through the rest of the 40-hour class in the scenarios. So we take opportunities throughout after certain blocks to go, okay, what's a good tactic for this particular situation, and what's what's one way to handle this? And we talk through a lot of that before we actually go into the scenarios. So,
yeah, I'm no expert in what is happening with CIT around the country, but I think in some areas it's rather than having a base of content like you have, I might end up with 2 or 3 different speakers coming in with 2 or 3 different ways that they've learned personally to de-escalate a situation. And I think my guess is that creates a little confusion by the end of the week, with different ideas. It sounds like you guys have you got some base content and that stays consistent throughout the week.
Yeah, it generally does. And, don't get me wrong, the experts in the, various disciplines that we bring in will offer up their own tips from their own experience and things that work for them.
Yep.
But I found that they often sound like a tactic that we teach anyway.
Right. Exactly.
So there's really, if you stay with some core principles that Vistelar teaches, you're going to be all right in 99% of your situations, regardless of the particular diagnosis of the person that you're dealing with or the cause of their particular crisis. So
and Jeff, do you have any idea? I just don't know what percentage. Do you have any idea what percentage of police officers in the country have been through some kind of CIT program?
I don't know across the country. I know in our area we're striving to maintain about a 25 to 30% rate of our patrol force. So we're certainly not sending everybody through it. We try to pick the 25 to 30% that, number one, want to do it, and number two, we think would be somewhat good at it. So we ask the chiefs in our area.
That makes a whole bunch of sense. I know. I don't know if you saw it. There was it was an article that was in the Journal Sentinel here in Milwaukee, but it was I don't know who. It seemed like the study was from somewhere else, but somebody did some big study showing that is kind of the sweet spot. If you can get 15 to 30% of your police department through this program, and that it's actually can be a problem if it's 100%. That there was actually some negative results from training everybody. I don't know why that would be, but
yeah, and I remember that article. It's been a while since I read it, but I think the national model for CIT recommends roughly 25%, if I'm not mistaken. And I think they do that for a reason. Like I said, it's not everybody really wants to do this, or even has the real ability to speak effectively with somebody in crisis. The patience, that it takes sometimes.
And then in Lansing, is it kind of known who is trained, and then they're the responders to these situations? Is that what happens?
Yeah, we try to have enough. The 25 to 30% for us kind of comes from the way our shifts run. If we have 25%, we'll be able to generally expect to have one or two people working every shift that are CIT trained. And if they're available, then we try to put them as the lead for a mental crisis, substance use crisis call. So our CIT officers in this area, once they graduate from the class, they're given a PIN that identifies them as a CIT officer.
Oh, okay. And then, but dispatch and whoever would know who those people are, and they'd get picked.
Yeah. And we have a mutual aid agreement with all of the agencies in the Tri-County area. So if they need a CIT officer and they don't have one working, they can call us and we'll send ours wherever they need to go. So
I love it, Jeff. I mean, but from what little I know, it seems like you got a heck of a program there, and it's volunteer, and so obviously some passion to make this happen, and you have people that otherwise are busy in their life coming in and volunteering their time. It's pretty cool.
Nobody gets any extra money for it. We just we get paid through our regular jobs to teach the program, but it's been done with very, very little funding compared to most of the other programs that I've heard of, at least going on around the country.
Yep. So. I know that some are volunteer. From what I learned last week, I think some are volunteer, some are paid in terms of the local NAMI office. And then, I think the police department sometimes is grant funded, sometimes it's per officer, like you're describing. I don't know what the average per officer price is. But
I don't know what other places are charging. I know we came up with the $100 per officer figure just to, we wanted to build up some funds just to maintain, in case we have some extra training for instructors to send them to, or, like I said, we cover all of our materials, course materials, and
the course materials are yours, right? You develop those internally.
Yeah, each of our speakers or instructors brings in their own presentation, and then we collect those and we give the students a binder, basically, that contains all of the presentations and gives them a chance to take notes and reflect back on what they learned. So.
Cool. Well, Jeff, this is great. I learned a lot. This has always been like I said, I went to this class that Joel Lashley, one of our trainers, was one of your, like you described, 15 speakers. He was one of 8 that he's been in security, actually, within healthcare for years, but developed, as you know, quite an expertise on how to deal with cognitive disabilities. And he has his, Vistelar, our crisis intervention stuff is partially based on what he's learned over the last 30 years. But he's quite an expert and quite one of the more popular NAMI speakers here locally.
He's definitely an expert in the field for sure. I don't know too many guys that know more about that kind of thing than he does.
Yep. Well, yeah, as you know, he wrote one of our books, Confidence in Conflict for Healthcare Professionals, and some very large organizations have adopted that. And so, yeah, he's a smart guy. So anyway, Jeff, this is great. I appreciate you taking the time today. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk more about what you're doing there in Lansing. And
all right, anytime.
Any closing comments about what we've talked about here, or what your thoughts about this whole issue of dealing with crisis?
I think it's a really, really bad problem that we're facing in law enforcement. The mental health crisis just does not seem to be getting any better, and something that is going to be facing law enforcement for a long time. So I think the CIT model and training is going to be critical importance for agencies to adopt and practice for the future. So, until we can figure out another way to tackle the mental illness situation that we have in the country, the cops are going to get stuck with it. So,
well, and I think it is, at least from what I've heard, is, and I'm sure you deal with it, is that police officers are going. We end up being the area's social workers, right?
Yeah.
That it ends up, a lot of this stuff falls to us to have to manage, and it's not like you went through police academy and learned how to deal with the mentally ill.
Yeah, exactly. And our jail deputies are dealing with it too, because we've got a lot of people in jail that are only in jail because we don't have a bed anywhere to get them help somewhere else. So.
Yep. Cool. Okay.
Jeff,
thanks so much.
Been a pleasure.
Again. Yep. Okay. Bye-bye. Well, that wraps up another episode of Confidence in Conflict. Hope you enjoyed my discussion with Jeff Campbell. Got great value from hearing about his experiences with crisis intervention training. In the next episode, I'll be talking again to Joel Lashley. I always enjoy my discussion with Joel. He's a self-described violence nerd, so I'm sure this will be a good one. In the meantime, if you want more expert advice on how to prevent and better manage conflict, subscribe to this podcast at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And again, if you like this episode, please write us a review. Also, visit Vistelar.com/blog to get notes for this show, share your comments, and access additional conflict management resources. Take care and stay safe.